Oh,
Okay,
whoops.
thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the invitation. Um, I already said to Helen, but I was particularly pleased to get invited to speak at the Culpeper Museum because my wife and I have terribly fond memories of visiting Culpeper. We've been there twice and just really loved the folks, loved the town. So it was fun. I will admit, though, I was disappointed because of the quarantine and now doing these virtual lectures are so common. And that's wonderful in terms of access. But there was a part of me that was a little disappointed because I didn't have an excuse to visit Culpeper once again. With that in mind, I should say also, if anybody tuned in today, hoping to see me sing Civil War songs, dance, and tell stories, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I like the good people of Culpeper enough that I would never inflict upon them the travesty which is my singing voice. So no live performances, and trust me, you should probably thank me for that when all is said and done. I am going to hopefully switch over. And Helen, if that isn't working, let me know. But on this end, it looks like it is. Great, thank you. So my topic probably seems a little odd to some folks. There's a reason for it, trust me. I'm going to talk about Civil War songs, popular songs of the Civil War. But I am going to come at it from kind of a different direction. We're going to look at a few songs, look at some lyrics, analyze a little bit of the music, and through the course of this, hopefully not only learn something about Civil War songs, but I also hope you get a feel for what a musicologist does and how we approach a subject like this. So when I say popular songs of the Civil War, I put up a list like this, and I hope everybody can see it. I know, depending on screen size, the font's a little small. But there you have a list, and my hunch is that most people recognize at least a few of the tunes. Some people recognize most of the tunes, and those who are historically inclined may very well recognize all the tunes. When I started doing Civil War research many, many years ago, this was the basis of the work I did. I mean, these form the soundtrack to my research. These are the songs you read about the most, you hear about, and you're assumed to know. Well, in the course of my work, I was reading through this journal, the Musical Review and Musical World from 1864. Came out of New York, kind of a highbrow journal on music, but it had some interesting stuff. And then I stumbled upon this article written by the journal's editor, Theodore Hagen. And it's an article called Our War Songs. And it's a really, really interesting article. In a very tiny amount of space, he goes through and talks about songs that have been written during the Civil War. Very interesting. And as part of his article, he put out an invitation to major publishers to send him their songs, and then he would list them for him. So imagine my surprise when I finished reading his little article. I see a list this long. In fact, the list was so long that it had to be continued in the next month's issue of the journal. 185 songs total. Now, if you're like me, I think I knew Civil War songs, right? And I see this list and I'm thinking, holy moly, I don't know what's going on. And so we take a minute and look close. Again, if you're all like me, I look through this list. I look through the titles of songs. I look through the composers, whatnot. None of this rings a bell in any level. And while that first list I showed you seemed to have a lot of songs, I realize I only know a fragment of what was published. Well, it raises a question, at least to me. Does that mean all of these were really bad songs and the ones that I do know were good songs? Or was there something else going on? Were these good songs that didn't succeed for a certain reason? Are these songs that did succeed at the time but history has chosen to forget them. Well, having had this thought enter my head, I then went back to the list. And I said to myself, wait a minute, I'm calling these popular songs from the Civil War. But when I start looking at them closely, I start asking myself, were they really that popular? Now, if I were to split these into something as simple as songs that are still used to this day, for example, the list gets a lot smaller. Some of these pieces are still in use today. You find them in public school books, you find them in movie soundtracks and whatnot. All right, well, keep going with me. What if I were to look at these songs and say, wait a minute, it's the Civil War, but what about Union and Confederacy? Clearly, all these songs were not popular with both the Union and the Confederacy. In fact, quite the opposite. Some of these would have been loved by one side and hated by the other side. Well, suddenly this whole notion I started with, that I was giving you a list of popular songs, well, now I'm left questioning what that list actually contains. And more importantly, as a musicologist, I begin to question the words I'm using to describe the music. What do I mean when I say popular song? And in a little bit, I will dissect these words a little bit and show you, show you how useful they are, but also how damaging they can be to the study. And in so doing, that leads me to the bigger question. What does it mean when a musicologist looks at the music of the Civil War? And in this case, popular song of the Civil War. And in a sense, I'm answering why I chose the topic I did for today. When I meet people and they learn that I am a scholar who specializes in music of the American Civil War, 9 times out of 10, they assume that means I study Battle Hymn of the Republic. And while I do, and I have published on the Battle Hymn of the Republic, I try and point out to them that that's really not my job, and it really isn't the job of a historian in this case. As a musicologist, I treat music as a very unique and powerful window into the past. Through music, I can try and understand the war's participants in a way that's very different from other ways of studying. By trying to understand their tastes, their aesthetic preferences, and how their emotional condition, if you will, relates to the music they consumed, that's what I can do with a piece of music. And that's what makes music worth studying. Well, I can't do that if I only study the top 10 hits of the 1860s. If I'm going to understand musical practice of the time, I have to look at all the music. I have to understand what were called good, what were called bad, which ones succeeded, which ones did not succeed. So with that in mind, you get my talk today. The question I raised is what makes a song popular? Or in fact, what makes a song unpopular at a given time? In this case, the Civil War. Is it the tune that sticks out? Is the lyric, or is there something else going on? Are there reasons, in fact, that might have kept a good song, a quality song, from succeeding during the war that maybe had nothing to do with musical reasons? Now, a little bit of the musicology side, bear with me, I'll make this as quick as possible. The confusion that I laid out in front was terminological to a large degree, and I did it somewhat on purpose. The problem stems from the fact that we, and when I say we, I mean musicologists as well as general listeners, we use the phrase popular song or popular music in different ways. And we do it simultaneously, and we rarely try and keep the meanings separate. We use the word as a genre designation. By genre, I'm talking a collection of music similar to what you would call classical music or church music or whatnot. Popular song, popular music is used to describe music specifically in opposition to art music, in that popular song is intended for entertainment, not edification. It's not meant to send you into the spheres to contemplate greatest reality, blah, blah, blah. It's meant to be entertaining. Now, particularly relevant to my talk today is popular music is also conceived of as commercial. And this is really important from a historian standpoint. A commercial piece of music can be judged on its success because success was part of its intention. If a piece of music is crafted as commercial, then I'm totally within my rights to say, you failed. You tried to be popular. You tried to hit a large audience and you did not succeed. This gives me a lever with which to judge these pieces. Now, we also use the word style, or excuse me, popular song in reference to a style. This is not a collection of individuals and whatnot. We're talking about the actual sound of the music. Everybody does this whenever they use a phrase like bluegrass, country music, rock and roll. You're talking about the sound of the music. And when, you know, I don't know, Travis Tritt and his band perform with the Richmond Orchestra, and somebody says, oh my gosh, it was really interesting. And their friend says, oh my gosh, did it sound like Beethoven? And the person says, no, it sounded like popular song, popular music. You're talking about the style, the characteristic of the sound, not the content or intention. And then last but not least, we still use the word popular like an adjective. We use popular to describe something that is well liked, regardless of what genre or style it occurs in. Well, this is where things kind of get cluttered with this terminology. Now, as I said earlier, in our case, we don't necessarily need to worry about style during the Civil War because the style is pretty unified. The problem arises when we use the descriptive form of popular as applied to the genre of popular. And what we end up with is a curious, let's call it a paradox. Not all popular song is actually popular. Or on the flip side, not everything that is popular is popular music. Now, it's that first category that I'm keyed in on. How is it that somebody can be writing popular song, but it turns out not to be popular? Well, to begin to at least understand this in some way, let me switch out those terms and give you the most common words you'll hear when somebody talks in relation to their attitude towards a piece of music. They hear a pop song and they tend to either like it or don't like it. And this is the first case, by the way, I can say where the time period we're dealing with, Civil War, this matters. This is not a characteristic you find throughout history, everyday history. When you are introduced, when the average person, listener, is introduced to a piece of popular music, a popular song, 9 times out of 10, they will either like it or don't like it. Rarely do you hear somebody say they hate a piece of music. And I'll explain that later. But by and large, most people are going to say, I like it or I don't like it, or they don't care. They're in that indifferent category. Hating is something very special. And before I get to hate, though, let's talk a little bit more about this and how it applies to what we're talking about. When listeners say they don't like a piece of music, a popular song, it's usually not necessarily a negative reaction. In fact, more often than not, it's a lack of a reaction. You hear a song on the radio, you hear a band perform, you hear somebody singing it, you know, and you just don't really care one way or the other. This is the majority of what happens with popular songs that don't survive. There's nothing wrong with the song. It's just that nothing stands out. There are other cases, however, where a song can be actually rather well constructed, but it's the wrong piece at the wrong time. That the song tries to do something that for whatever reason doesn't fit the time and the audience that it's trying to do it. Now, with any luck, the piece might be resurrected later and find a second life. But that actually doesn't happen too often because with popular song, if you strike out the first time, you don't have a lot of chance of coming up to bat again. And then my last category is flat out the song doesn't work. And just so you know, I use the phrase doesn't work as opposed to bad. Bad is a really heavily laden term. And I think it's more generous to say that a song works or it doesn't. Not that it's necessarily got something bad about it, but geez, it just doesn't click. The lyric doesn't quite line up with the music. That's just not the right word to be using there. Now, one more thing before I give you a musical example. This is a really fun idea, relatively new in my field. But it's a super useful tool when you're talking about popular song and popular music. The word is salience. And this idea was produced by a music theorist by the name of Brad Osborne. And it's just a wonderful concept. He pulled a bunch of things together into one tight package. One of the hardest things about writing a successful popular song is that it can't be too new and it can't be too old. If it's too old, the audience is going to say, hey, there's nothing new. It's old. We've already been over that. Don't want to listen. But the problem is, if it's too new, the listener's going to say, what is this? I don't understand. I like the old stuff better. So songwriters are caught in this median, this middle ground, what Osborne has referred to as the Goldilocks principle. Your song can't be too hot and it can't be too cold. It's got to be in the middle. And this leads me to the word ambiguity. A lot of times you would think the word ambiguous is not a good word to apply to a hit song. But I suggest that's not always the case, that ambiguity can be a really powerful tool for a gifted songwriter. And I think it was particularly useful during the Civil War. Now, who am I going to use as my example is Stephen Foster. Now, I wish I could see your faces because I'm going to guess that more than a few people are a little surprised that I'm going to talk about ambiguity, but I'm going to use Stephen Foster as an example. You betcha. Stephen Foster deserves all the credit he gets for being a truly great songwriter. But one way of understanding why he was so great is how he managed to navigate his music through so many different audiences and managed to please so many of them. And yes, one way he does that is through ambiguity. But take a minute here. He wrote over 100 songs during the war, and I bet nobody knew that unless you're a Foster specialist. That's a lot of songs. But the truth of the matter is, neither you nor I know most of those songs. Now, for example, these are all the songs Foster published in 1862. The blue ones are clearly war songs. The red ones have absolutely nothing to do with the war, which is interesting in itself. You would think that with the war going on, somebody might focus more of their time on war songs. But in this case, Foster's trying to make a living writing songs, and he felt justified in writing pieces that were just for home use and had nothing to do with the war. Now, there's two green ones up here too, and these are the ones I'm going to call the ambiguous ones, but I'll explain those in a minute. Now, proof, you want proof that Foster was a great songwriter. Of whatever this is, 15 or 16 songs. 5 of these things lasted beyond his lifetime and in fact lasted into our days today. Now that's a stunning success rate. Of the 5 war songs written in 1862, 4 of them were big sellers. 4 of them made it into the canon. That's truly astounding. However, as I warned you, I'm not going to look at those. I'm more curious about the little one that got left down at the bottom. The song called We've a Million in the Field. How is it that Foster could write 4 crackerjack tunes and one that didn't? And why didn't it? Let's take a quick peek at it. Here's the lyric to it. And feel free, please, to take a moment while I'm talking to go over this. Had I time, I would drag this out, but I will cut to the chase a little bit. This is not Foster's best lyric, okay? And in fact, Foster himself often kind of mocked his own lyric writing. This is clearly a patriotic song. It's clearly talking about recruits joining the Union Army. But look at the opening imagery. The flags are flying and brave men dying. It's not a chipper way to start a patriotic tune. And then the third line, the din of battle is revealed. Revealed to who? This song, if you scan the ends of lines and the scansion, you get the feeling that it was hastily written, that he's quickly matching rhyme schemes. And the end result is the tune kind of lacks character. We know what he's talking about, but you don't really know how we feel about it. I would also then go to the third verse, and that's where he makes kind of his first stumble, if you will, as a songwriter. The verse is down in old Kentucky, by the way, apparently where people are plucky. Not a great rhyme again. But what happens when he opens the third verse with Kentucky is he targets an audience, a very specific audience. Now, folks in Kentucky are probably thrilled to death that they're being sung about, and they might like the song all the more because they're in it. But when you do that, you're focusing down on one population, yes, but you're actually ignoring the rest of the population. That's a dangerous thing to do when you're writing a song. Excuse me. Last thing to say before I hit play on this. I would ask that you look at the chorus and go ahead and hear the words in your head and imagine, how would you set that to music? What type of music are these words demanding? What does it need to sound like for the words to be effective? So there you go. First thing first, the melody of the whole song is okay. But you probably heard it's a very jagged melody. There's a lot of jumping around, and it makes it difficult to sing. In fact, right now, if I ask somebody in the audience, sing me back the opening melody, it's kind of hard to remember because it's jumping all over. The second thing, at least in this performance, the chorus goes to a pianissimo. It goes soft, which is exactly the opposite aural image you would want accompanying a million soldiers in the field. A million soldiers, I mean, that's loud, that's big, it's brash and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad song. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying he made some choices in this song and slightly missed the pocket. And this is proven then by the number of sales he did not get with this song. Now, just so you think I'm not blowing hot air, let's compare this to a song of his that did sell well, that did very well. We Are Coming, Father Abram. The first thing to point out, for those of you that don't know, is that Foster didn't write this lyric. And that's not a bad thing in this case, because the lyric is pretty good. We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more. Very catchy opening phrase. It's also the refrain and forms the basis of the chorus. Notice that it's an action verb. In the previous song, we're a million in the field. It's very static. The million are just standing in the field. We are coming, Father Abram. The people are moving. There's action. There's force behind it. Then the next line, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England shore. Well, what did this lyricist do? Didn't pick one location, picked large geographic areas, the Mississippi and New England, which encompasses a lot of different people. And those listeners now can say, hey, yeah, I'm talking about me. This is reinforced in the next line. We leave our plows and workshops. This song is targeting the working class listener. It's not an elitist song, even though it's technically a parlor ballad. And this is reinforced then, our wives and children dear. This is reaching out, it's trying to capture anybody who's married and has children. So these are all the tricks the songwriter's doing to communicate, to reach their audience and whatnot. Then the music that Foster puts behind this. I'll hit play in a minute, but notice how there is still a fair amount of jumping around, but he makes it much easier to sing and remember because he keeps repeating ideas, little musical ideas. You don't have to learn a long extended melody. You just need to learn little fragments, and you can sing this song yourself.
We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England shore. We leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full for utterance, with not a silent tear. We dare not look behind us, but steadfastly before. We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more.
So there you got it. This is one of his more successful songs from the time. And it's really a well-crafted song. Great lyric. And he picks really the ideal setting. It's kind of marchy, but the march-like feel doesn't overwhelm it. The tune is complex in that it has a lot of leaping and motion, but it's easily memorized, and he gives it to you in short clips. It's a very well-crafted song. And very much in opposition to the previous tune I showed you. Now, let's pursue this notion of ambiguity a little bit more before we leave Foster behind. These are the two tunes on the list I showed you. And I said they weren't really war songs, but they're not really parlor ballads. And by that I mean, and again, you can see if you read the lyrics, you could argue that they were suitable for use during the Civil War. You know, the first one is talking about the memory of mother and home. And you can say to yourself, oh, okay, I can picture a soldier singing this. And the second one, I'll be home tomorrow, talks about being away from home, wandering lonely, but now I'm returning home. Again, you could say, you know what? This sort of kind of maybe represents a soldier coming back from the war. The problem is, if you look at either of these, but I would suggest you look at the I'll be home tomorrow. The lyric is extremely non-committal. You don't know who he or she is. You don't know where they are. You don't know why they left. You know they're returning, but we're not sure where we're returning to. There's nothing concrete that you can use to identify the protagonist, the situation, or whatnot. It's an extremely, dare I say, bland description. And a songwriter like Foster does this on purpose. He doesn't want to give you too much precision. He wants the ambiguity in the hopes that the listener will fill in their own meaning. Now, as a song, one would assume the music now is going to give you the clue you need. So you tell me, you hear the music. Is this a soldier?
I've wandered far from those I love, and many years have passed. since in my dear old cherished home I saw their faces last. But now I am returning, and my journey soon will end. I'll join the throng where happy smiles and gentle voices blend. Farewell, farewell, every cloud of sorrow. All my heart is filled with joy, for I'll be home tomorrow.
Now, I don't want to speak for you, but I find that music non-committal. I can't call it a particularly happy tune. I can't call it a particularly sad tune. It's pretty, don't get me wrong. Foster writes better tunes than I could. But the tune doesn't pick a side. It's just kind of in the middle of the road and coasting along. And you put that together with this lyric, and you end up with a piece that just shoots right down the middle. It doesn't lean one way or the other. This type of songwriting worked very well for Foster for most of his career. This allowed him to produce attractive, marketable music that people enjoyed singing. They enjoyed hearing it. I would suggest during the Civil War, this was not the best strategy. At this point, and this is 1862, people may want a distraction from the war, but you can't ignore that the war's going on. And so a piece that is almost completely non-committal, I just don't think it's going to work at the time. And it tells us something about the audience he's writing for. Now, let me give you two more examples of songs that didn't work. And this is kind of the two other categories I mentioned. This one I'm not going to play for you, and you can read the lyric if you want. It's a long, long lyric. Brief background. There was a short period of time where publishers were fond of songs about dying drummer boys. As morbid as that sounds. Well, a couple songs were written, and some of you may have heard The Drummer Boy of Shiloh was one of the most successful of them. Well, this is one song from that category, and it was written by Henry Clay Work, a very good songwriter who had major hits. He wrote Kingdom Coming. He wrote Marching Through Georgia. Well, this is his dying drummer boy song, and my guess is none of you have heard it, and my guess is none of you are going to hear it. Because this is an instance where he didn't stick close to the middle enough. He went too far to one side. Briefly put, in the first stanza, we see that a drummer boy has been shot, okay? And he falls down, he's probably dying, and all he asks for is a drink of water. Well, the second verse, all the rest of his fellow soldiers run away. So he's left by himself dying, and he still wants that drink of water. The third verse, the enemy comes up, they see him, but they move on. They don't help him, and they don't give him any water. Well, heck, we get to the fourth verse. Guess what? Everybody's ignored him. He never got his water, and he dies. It's an extremely depressing lyric. It really is morbid. And I think this is a situation where Henry Clay Work misread the point of the work of the song. People may have found some sort of inspiration from a song that ennobled the death of a young drummer boy. But by 1862, we're talking about families that have lost their children on the battlefield. And the last thing they want is a dark song about a lonely death of a child on the field. I mean, I'm not at all surprised this one didn't work. Now, speaking of ambiguity, I would point out again, you'll notice how in this lyric, he never once refers to whether it's Union or Confederate. 90% of the time, that's a sign that the publisher is trying to market as broadly as possible. Didn't work with this one. And then, of course, I couldn't give a talk like this without showing you at least one stinker. So You have my apologies in advance. But we have to talk about it. And by the way, if anybody claims William F. Otten as a distant relative, my apologies. Sorry, distant ancestor. But I'll be frank, folks, this one's a stinker. Look at the lyric. To arms, ye sons of the North. Rally under the flag of the Union. Protect and defend her, yada, yada, yada. Well, you say to me, what's wrong with that? Well, I say nothing. In fact, that's why every single one of those phrases has already been used 10 to 15 times in songs. It's like somebody got a list of catchphrases you use in a patriotic song, and this boy stuck them all in back to back. Well, and then it gets a little weird, to be honest. And I don't know if I can see it. My screen is somewhat covering it. There we go. He goes on, protect and defend her, ever she's worth, to be held next our free Constitution. Well, Twix, you mean the fence post? I have no idea what he's talking about there. Now, what about the music? Now, I'm hoping and assuming that many of you, read music. Many of you might even be pianists. If you look at the piano part to this, I think you will conclude pretty quickly that it's not only simple, it's simplistic. You don't find these very often, folks, but this is what I can legally call a 2-chord song. The entire song is a C major chord and a G major chord, a C major chord and a G major chord. And add to that, look at how many times the piano is just either bonking out one chord without moving its fingers or just jumping around in octaves. There is a difference between being simple and simplistic. And this one crosses the border into simplistic. The melody, I got to tell you, is not much better. Let me give you just a taste of it. All right, sorry, but I'm going to stop there. That was enough for me. It really is simple. It's simple-minded. You'll notice, for example, that when the voice comes in, it picks up the melody that was introduced in the piano at the beginning, but it's not the same melody because the second half of that phrase is new music. Excuse me. So you're left wondering, is the opening piano thing an introduction? Or is it a first statement of the melody? Well, then the melody rambles up and goes to a half cadence. You're left on Flag of the Union. And then we go back to protect. We go right back to the thing. Formally, there's no drive to it. It's just kind of clumps of material. And by the time you get to the point where I stopped, harmonically speaking, you don't really care where it's going because there's no drive. Now, once again, to defend what I'm saying here when I'm attacking this piece, I said there's a difference between simple and simplicity, and that is absolutely true. That previous song, I think, failed because it insulted the intelligence of its audience. It's so easy, especially historically, to assume that past generations were not necessarily musically illiterate, but they weren't as sharp or as educated or well listened as we are today. And that's a dangerous mistake. That audience clearly wanted more meat to their music, and they weren't going to be patronized. Compare what I just played to this one, Walter Kittredge's Tenting on the Old Campground. remains one of the most popular and successful songs of the Civil War, and for a good reason. The opening of the tenting, single line on the piano. You can't get any more simple. And what is the piano doing? It's imitating the bugle call reveille. Well, you might argue that's interesting compared to the first one, because didn't the opening sort of sound like a brassy? Big difference. Look what comes next. The piano comes in. There's a little dotted rhythm. It sounds kind of marchy, but the music is fairly simple. It gets out of the way. And then at the top of where the voice comes in, look at how the piano almost disappears from the texture. Instead of clumping along and doubling the voice, the piano gets completely out of the voice's way. All attention focuses in on that melody and the words. At that point, you hear the singer say, "We're tenting tonight on the old campground. We're tenting. We." This is a soldier's song. It's written in the soldier's voice. That changes that opening bugle call you heard. And frankly, it starts to define where this song was going. Truth be told, tenting was meant as a parlor ballad. So it was intended and purchased by civilians. But this song, it makes no bones about targeting the soldier, and then after the war, targeting the veteran. And boy, does it score big time. Remarkably effective song. The simplicity of the piano just doing the single chords. The fact that by the time you get to the chorus, the singers are basically almost chanting on one note, completely establishes a mood that you might not have expected at the beginning of the song. This is more a soldier's song, but there's a real melancholy to it. It's if I dare say, it's a real soldier's song. They're accepting the darkness of the situation. And the killer, for those of you that don't know the song, at the end of each verse, he says, tenting tonight on the old campground. The last time they sing it, they say, dying tonight on the old campground. It's real got a kick to it. There is a sophistication here that is utterly absent from the previous piece. This audience who listened and purchased this song, they needed some good ears. They needed a sensitivity, and they needed some emotional depth to get this out. When I learned that a song like this succeeded very well, whereas the other one didn't, I come to realize that this audience was aware of what was going on around them. It was aware of the depth of the situation. All right, moving on. Let me now get back to that one category that I left out the previous time, namely hate. As I said before, when people say, okay, I know the song you're talking about, they tend to say either I like it or they don't like it. Now, let's be honest. We've all at one time or another probably said, oh, I hate that song. But let's be honest, that's usually because well, in the world of pop music, it's usually because of overplay. You've heard a song so many times, you just don't want to hear it again. But do you really hate it? I mean, hate's an awfully strong word. When I'm looking at this notion of hate, I don't necessarily say that the piece is hateful. What I say is somebody hates it. And so what I'm saying here is, when you get to this notion of a piece that is loved or hated, you're talking less about the notes and the music, and you're talking more about the listener. So watching the reception of a Civil War song, you start to see patterns of listenership. And no surprise, the American Civil War had simultaneous communities, all with not just political orientations, but with musical orientations as well. And all of these overlapped and in some cases competed with each other. It's no surprise that some songs would be liked, some songs maybe were indifferent, but some songs literally were hated because they represented something that an individual community did not agree with. I'm talking Union and Confederate, of course, but I'm also talking the geographic North and South. And please always remember East versus West. Dixie may have been popular in Virginia during the war, and it may have been treated like a war song, but in California, it's a pop song. Who cares? What about soldier versus civilian populations? Two different attitudes towards the war. And I can keep going. Upper class, lower class, working class intelligentsia. Black folks, whether they're enslaved or freed, versus white folks, gender, on and on and on. Each of these communities during the war is going to have a really strong opinion about what they listen to and what they hear. Before I give you my examples, again, apologies, I make this real quick. A little bit more musicology. When we're talking about a popular song, we are talking about a single thing, but it is made up of two halves. We have music and we have lyrics. There are situations in history, and this is one of them, where you actually kind of need to separate the two. Generally speaking, a popular song, the music's almost always good, because if it isn't good, it doesn't fall into the category of popular or successful. But more importantly, the music is always judged aesthetically. Notes don't have any meaning. Musical meaning is put on from the outside. And that's very different than the lyrics. Lyrics are evaluated on their poetic value, certainly, but they also have a meaning. They have a point they're making, and this is where the problems arise. So what happens if I have a song, I really like the music, I like the tune, but the lyrics are really bad? Well, today, the solution, hello, cancel culture, we just chuck the song out. Not back then. You don't like the lyrics to a song, but you like the tune? Great. Toss the original lyrics, write some new ones, and poof, you have a new song. This is what we call contrafact, practice that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages and was very common during the 19th century in America. And this is really important to know about when you start talking about the reception of certain songs. For example, what about this good old chestnut? Right? Everybody's saying, oh, I know that tune. It's Battle Hymn of the Republic, right? And my response would be, well, sort of yes, sort of no. Yeah, okay. Julie Ward Howe wrote a poem called The Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was stuck onto some music. It became popular. But the truth of the matter is, if this were 1863 and I was speaking to an audience of people at the time, and I played that melody, a small portion of the audience would have said, oh, that's Battle Hymn of the Republic. The rest would have said, oh, that's John Brown's song. Battle Hymn of the Republic came out late and was extremely popular with the elite New Englanders, usually associated with the abolition movement. John Brown's Body was a marching song. Union soldiers across the board were fond of it. This thing traveled all over the country and was gobbled up by these soldiers. Even Confederate soldiers grew to appreciate the song. So back at that time, is this Battle Hymn of the Republic? No, 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 no. It's a different song. Now, what about this one? How about number 2?
Well, I wish I was in the land of cotton wool, and there I'm not forgot to look away, look away, look away.
And number 3.
Sovereigns, hear your country call you, up lest worse than death befall you too.
Okay, now what did I just play for you? Did I play one song in 3 versions? Or did I, in fact, just play for you 3 different pieces of music? And that answer may not lie with us. It may lie with the listeners at the time. The first one I played, Dixie, instrumental version performed by a regimental band. Well, who likes that? Soldiers. And I mean all soldiers, North and South. They weren't necessarily caught up with Dixie as some kind of patriotic or political song. They thought it was a good tune and it was a great march. Your average civilian in the South would have loved this form of Dixie. Who would have disliked an instrumental performance of Dixie? Hardcore unionists. Most unionists didn't care. Well, what about the second version I played for you? The implication is soldiers sitting around a campfire singing it. You bet your average Confederate's going to love that song. As I said earlier, Westerners who aren't invested North or South, they think it's a great pop song. Who's going to dislike Emmett's original version? Some unionists. But you know who really hated it? Were upper-class Confederates. Upper-class Confederates were horrified that a minstrel song was selected as a representative of the new Confederacy. They did everything they could to get rid of this tune, and it was too late. It's way too popular. Well, that leads to our third one, Albert Pike's new set of lyrics for the music to Dixie. Well, how did this one go over? Who liked it? Well, yeah, upper-class Confederates, because that's what they were looking for. Who disliked it? Everyone North and Union, because the words are extremely pro-Southern, anti-Union, and whatnot. Truth be told, most listeners fell in the middle. The song sold well, but it was not necessarily something everybody was running around singing. And my last example, my apologies that many will find this offensive, but I think it's a real important one to share with you because it shows that we have to take these things carefully and look pretty closely to understand the complexity of listening back then. The song was Kingdom Coming, again by Henry Clay Work, the composer I played earlier. As you can tell by the lyric, this one was written in so-called dialect. It is, for all intents and purposes, a minstrel song, which is a little odd given the year it was written. But Kingdom Coming ended up being surprisingly successful. But let's qualify that success. Who really liked this song? White Northern abolitionists. Because for them, this song represents the victory of the Union against slavery. Who really didn't like this song? Black abolitionists, who saw this song as yet one more negative reinforcement of a stereotype of Black Americans. Now, I trust many of you have heard, and it's true, that Stephen Douglas, when he spoke of the music of Stephen Foster, he complimented the fact that Foster humanized Black men and women. And that was what was so valuable about his music. This is doing the exact opposite. Maybe it's talking about liberating the slaves that the Union troops are going to save the day, but it does almost as much damage as it does good. The sad truth is that many Northern abolitionists really could care less about equal rights. And you will learn, if you look into the literature, that many people who were diehard against slavery, then in later years fought against the right for Black people to hold votes. So we've got this really complex, weird issue here. And I'm not going to play the tune. Many of you probably know it, and plus I'm running out of time. But it's a dang catchy tune. And if you really want to get confused, it's been argued that this song was surprisingly popular in the South. And the speculation for that is that Southern listeners didn't read it as pro-union. They also didn't read it as abolition. They read it as a minstrel song. They literally took it as a comic song, trying to make fun of the situation that the Union shows up, the master runs away, and the slaves are now running around free. They took it as a lighthearted song. Crazy different reactions to one song. And need I point out a classic example of how all these meanings then transform into our days. This song would not fly in any way, shape, or form today, right? Enough said. So I hope my examples showed you at least a glimpse of where I'm coming from, what I'm thinking of, and how there were unique factors during the war that could influence whether a piece was liked or not, disliked, even if the composer was trying to write a commercial hit. But I also hope you've seen, and I hope I've shown convincingly, that at some point, the content of the piece is less important than who was listening. And this I've certainly learned over my years of studying. I think I've learned more about Civil War Americans than I have about Civil War music. I would be happy to field any questions or hear any comments. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, let me just go ahead and check to see if we've got anything in the comment section. Oops. All right. Looks like we don't have any questions. All right. Well, if that, sorry. She has perfect timing.
Everyone's a critic, you know, I love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, if that's all, and we don't have any questions, I would like to thank you very much for speaking with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and end our Facebook Live. All right. Let me just double check to make sure we are off. Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And let me see, I'm going to go ahead and stop.